Rochester, New York sat under a chilly late October sky, the kind where the wind coming off Lake Ontario sneaks through window frames no matter how tightly they re-shut.
On Lake Avenue, a quiet line of old brick row houses watched the day fade. Inside the narrow living room of number 1427, Evelyn Markham, 67 and widowed for nearly 12 years, moved slowly around her home with the kind of nervous energy only loneliness can create. She wiped the dining table again even though it was spotless, the old oak shining under the soft glow of a lamp shaped like a seashell. She straightened the silverware, adjusted the napkins she'd ironed that morning, and smoothed the green knitted sweater she'd chosen because her late husband Walter once told her it made her look like a woman who never loses hope. Today was her birthday, and she had been waiting all day for someone to knock. 3 weeks earlier, she had called each of her children carefully, trying not to sound desperate even though a part of her knew she was.
Brianna, sweetheart, I'm making pot roast the way you used to love.
If you fly in Friday night, I'll keep a slice warm for you. Mom, I'm drowning in end-of-quarter deadlines, Brianna replied from her Chicago condo, typing loudly in the background. I'm not saying no, but don't count on it, okay? Evelyn had whispered a small okay, even though her stomach dropped. Next, she phoned her son, Troy, in Atlanta.
Troy, honey, you haven't visited in so long.
I still have that scarf I knitted for Christmas.
You look handsome in it.
Troy laughed the way people do when they're half listening. Happy early birthday, Mom. I'll try to call you that night.
If I forget, well, happy birthday in advance.
Then came her youngest, Lila, the one she always believed would never drift too far from home.
Baby, I don't need presents.
I just want to see you. Lila didn't pick up. A voicemail beep followed, then silence. She didn't return the call. And so Evelyn prepared the house anyway. She vacuumed twice.
Lit cinnamon vanilla candles.
Baked cornbread and bought a chocolate cake from a small bakery on Ridge Road. She moved slowly between the kitchen and living room, each movement purposeful, as if performing a ritual that could magically summon her family home. By late afternoon, the sky dimmed into that blue-gray shade found only in cold northern towns as Halloween approaches. A few kids passed by in jackets too thin for the weather. Evelyn tried not to look at the clock. She failed. It was 5:32 p.m. She set 6 candles on the cake, one for every decade of her life and one extra for luck, her mother used to say. She sat on the old floral sofa and kept her phone in her hand, screen up, ringer on high.
Nothing lit up.
No text. No call. Not even a voicemail. At 6:08, she stood and walked to the window. The street was empty except for swirling leaves and the flicker of a broken street lamp. She whispered quietly into the glass, maybe they're running late. But she knew the kind of lateness that has no intention behind it. Her chest tightened not from age, but from a familiar sting, the realization that you love people who no longer look back. Evelyn turned off most of the lights, leaving only a warm lamp near her husband's old recliner. She picked up the bottle of red wine she'd chilled earlier, opened it, poured a small glass, stared at it, and poured it back. Drinking alone felt like admitting defeat. At exactly 7:14 p.m., she gave up on pretending. She held the cake carefully, thinking maybe she'd light just one candle and make a quiet wish for strength. Or acceptance. Or maybe, simply, a sign that she wasn't as invisible as she felt. She set the cake down and then
3 soft knocks.
Not the confident, hurried knocks of her children. These were gentle, unsure, as if the person on the other side debated turning around twice before finally raising their hand. Evelyn's heart fluttered unexpectedly, like it used to when Walter surprised her with flowers after long shifts at the GM plant. She brushed a hand through her short silver hair, steadied herself, and opened the door. Standing on her small porch, under the dim porch light, was Calvin Rhodes, her neighbor from across the street. A quiet man, early 70s, with a kind but weathered face. His grey cardigan had frayed sleeves, his jeans were old, and in his hands he held a craft paper box tied with twine. His breath fogged in the cold air.
Evelyn, MS.
Markham, he said softly, shifting his weight like he wasn't sure he belonged there. I smelled baking earlier. Thought maybe you were celebrating something. Evelyn blinked, stunned. Today is my birthday, she admitted. His eyes warmed. Then I hope you won't mind.
I baked an apple pie.
Still warm. Figured it'd be wrong to eat it alone.
She exhaled a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh and stepped aside. Calvin, please come in.
It's freezing out there. Calvin removed his shoes politely, placing them neatly by the door. He followed her into the living room, where the glow of the small lamp softened every corner. The smell of cinnamon and apples filled the air as he opened the box. Evelyn hurried to make coffee. Black or with cream?
Black.
Reminds me of the old mechanic shop I worked at back in the day, he said with a nostalgic grin. They sat across from each other, 2 plates of cake and pie between them. They talked for hours. Calvin told her about his years fixing cars at a small garage near Charlotte Beach, about the dog he loved for 16 years, about losing his wife to cancer in 2019. He didn't speak with self-pity, just the quiet honesty of someone who had lived through things and come out gentler, not harder. Evelyn told him about her children, smart, successful, scattered, and increasingly distant. She described Walter, how he loved fishing at Irondequoit Bay and how he always kept peppermint in his coat pocket. Calvin listened as if every detail mattered. And her heart, long and used to being heard, softened. Hours passed unnoticed. By the time they realized how late it was, the clock read 11:52 p.m. When Calvin finally rose to leave, he hesitated at the doorway, one hand gripping the frame lightly. Thank you, Evelyn, he said quietly. Haven't had a night that felt this human in a long while. She reached out, touched his hand briefly, gently.
I should be the one thanking you. You saved my birthday.
He offered a small, shy smile. Then he stepped into the cold, pulling his cardigan tight as he crossed the street. Evelyn watched until his figure disappeared behind his fence. Only then did she close the door, lean against it, and breathe in the peace that had settled unexpectedly into her home. For the first time in many years, she fell asleep without a single tear. January arrived in Rochester like a blunt force, thick snow muffling the streets, winds from Lake Ontario slicing through coats, and grey clouds flattening every bit of color from the neighborhood. It was the kind of winter that made people stay inside unless absolutely necessary. For Evelyn Markham, whose lungs had never been the strongest, the cold always worried her. But she still walked every morning, bundled in Walter's old scarf, believing the fresh air did more good than harm. One morning around mid-January, she woke with a cough so deep it rattled her chest. She tried sitting up slowly, but the room spun. Her breath came in thin, wheezing drags. By noon, her shoulders trembled with every cough. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. The floor rushed up to meet her. Her neighbor on the left, Mrs. Wu, heard the thud and knocked, then used the spare key Evelyn kept under a ceramic goose by the door. She found Evelyn on the kitchen floor, cheeks flushed, breath ragged.
Evelyn, can you hear me? A faint nod.
Mrs. Wu called 911. Within minutes, paramedics lifted Evelyn onto a stretcher, wrapped her in blankets, and loaded her into the ambulance.
The siren cut through the quiet morning like a warning for anyone listening. Time is not guaranteed.
At Rochester General Hospital, ER doctors ran tests immediately.
Severe pneumonia.
Blood oxygen low.
A fever hitting 103,6 Grad Fahrenheit.
They admitted her to the fourth floor room 414, the one near the window that overlooked a parking lot buried under snow. The sky outside looked like it was made from cold cement. Evelyn lay there with tubes in her arms, a heart monitor beeping steadily beside her. Nurses spoke gently but moved with practiced urgency, the way people do when they've seen conditions turn deadly without warning. When she was awake enough to speak, she reached for her phone.
Her hands shook. She called Brianna first.
"Mom? You're in the hospital." The typing sounds in the background never stopped.
"I'm on a conference call."
"Are you stable? Did the doctors say it's serious?" "It's pneumonia," Evelyn whispered. "Drink warm water and rest. I'll try to visit this weekend if flights aren't delayed." There was no promise, just an if. Next she called Troy. He answered on the third ring, voice groggy. "Mom, geez, it's barely morning here." "It's noon here," she said softly. "I'm in the hospital. Pneumonia. They say I'll be here a while." "Damn. That's rough. I've been slammed with work. But I'll send something."
"Hang in there, okay?"
He hung up within a minute. Then came Lila. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. Evelyn felt a hollow ache that had nothing to do with illness. Later that day, a nurse brought a delivery.
"A bouquet of white lilies, beautiful, large, expensive."
The card read, "Get well soon. Brianna." Evelyn stared at the lilies, breathing through her mouth to avoid the allergic reaction she'd had since childhood. She pressed the call button and asked the nurse to move them outside the room. "I'm allergic," she apologized, embarrassed. "Oh honey," the nurse whispered kindly. "I'll put them at the front desk." Troy's gift came next in the form of a text message. "Sent $300 so you can hire someone to help you after discharge." He added a thumbs-up emoji. Lila finally responded with a simple red heart emoji at 11:42 p.m. Not a word. Not even a question. The next day, a clipboard-bearing administrator entered with the first hospital bill estimate. $4,800 already. By day 4, the expected total had climbed to $9,100 plus. Evelyn held the printed invoice and felt her stomach tighten. Her monthly Social Security check was $1,430 before deductions. Her savings had been slowly drained over the years for repairs, medications, and rising living costs. She did not want to become a burden. She did not want to beg her children for help. She looked at the plain gold wedding ring on her finger, the last thing of Walter's she still kept close. She twisted it gently, knowing pawn shops wouldn't offer much, but maybe enough to lighten the bill. That afternoon, a knock sounded at her door. A familiar voice followed.
"Evelyn?
"It's Calvin." He entered quietly, carrying a stainless steel thermos wrapped in a striped dish towel. His coat was dusted with snowflakes. "I made chicken soup," he said, holding up the thermos like a peace offering. "My wife used to swear it cured everything except a broken heart." Evelyn chuckled, then coughed until her eyes watered. Calvin hurried to pour the soup into a hospital cup, blowing on it awkwardly before handing it over. "Careful, it's hotter than it looks," he said. He stayed the whole afternoon. He told stories from his old mechanic days, described the time a goose wandered into the repair shop and refused to leave, and even played a terrible game of tic-tac-toe with her on the whiteboard by the bed. Evelyn's chest still pained her, but for a few hours she forgot to feel lonely. At sunset, she drifted to sleep mid-sentence. Calvin watched her breathing even out, relieved. He straightened the blankets, set the thermos aside, and walked silently out of the room. But instead of heading home, he followed the hallway signs to the billing office. Inside, the receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, clearing his throat. "I'd like to talk about the balance on room 414.
Namens Evelyn Markham.
She typed quickly. "The current balance is $8,412.67. Insurance covered part, but the rest is." "I'd like to pay it," he said. Her eyebrows shot up. "All of it?" He nodded. "And I'd like to stay anonymous." "Are you family?"
No.
"Just someone who doesn't want her worrying when she should be healing." The administrator hesitated, eyes softening. "We can arrange that." Calvin pulled out his worn checkbook, the same one he used for property taxes, dog food, and the occasional donation to the local animal shelter. He wrote the amount carefully, his handwriting shaky but determined. As he walked back through the hospital lobby, he didn't feel noble or heroic. He felt relieved. Relieved that he could help someone who had helped him simply by letting him share her birthday. 3 days later, Evelyn awoke to find a new invoice on her bedside table.
Balance due. $0.
A note underneath, paid in full, donor requests anonymity. Her throat tightened. Her eyes watered, not from coughing this time. When Calvin visited later with fresh apples and a crossword puzzle book, she asked softly,
"Calvin, was it you?"
He smiled with half his mouth, the way men do when they don't want credit. "Just figured an old man ought to be useful once in a while." Evelyn squeezed his hand. Her voice shook. "You didn't have to." "I know," he whispered. "But I wanted to." And for the first time since she'd been hospitalized, she felt warm, not from the blankets, not from the soup, but from the quiet certainty that someone in this world genuinely cared whether she lived or died. By early April, Rochester finally thawed. The stubborn winter ice melted from the gutters, and pale green buds dotted the trees along Lake Avenue. For Evelyn Markham, returning home after 3 weeks in the hospital felt like stepping into sunlight after being buried underground. Her lungs were still fragile, but every breath of cool spring air tasted like freedom. Calvin walked her to the porch the day she was released, holding her elbow the way one holds an antique vase, careful, gentle, terrified of doing harm. "You sure you're steady?" he asked for the 10th time. "Calvin," she huffed, though her eyes softened, "I'm not made of glass." "You just survived pneumonia," he reminded. "You're at least half glass." She laughed, a low raspy sound that warmed him more than he admitted. Inside, she inhaled deeply. The house smelled faintly of lavender. Calvin had washed her throw blankets, aired out the living room, swept the floors, even restocked the pantry with canned soup, apples, and tea. She didn't ask how he got in. She suspected Mrs. Wu lent him the spare key. Over the next few weeks, this became their routine. Every morning, Calvin knocked softly and handed her a paper bag with a fresh sourdough roll from the corner bakery. Every afternoon, he appeared with a pot of chicken noodle soup or lentil stew, claiming he made too much again, though Evelyn suspected he made exactly enough for two. Every evening, he sat in her living room, talking until the sky turned orange behind the blinds. Sometimes they watched old reruns of Jeopardy! And argued over answers. Sometimes they reminisced about their spouses, never comparing grief, only honoring it. Sometimes they sat quietly, sipping tea, letting the silence speak for them. They never kissed. Never held hands longer than a passing moment.
Never slept under the same roof.
Their closeness was not the kind found in romance novels. It was the kind two wounded people discover when they recognize survival in someone else's eyes. But the world outside didn't care about nuance.
The first whisper.
The trouble began with Mrs. Patterson, a 64-year-old retiree with binoculars sharper than her eyesight and a talent for turning assumptions into community-wide news. She lived 3 houses down, spent most afternoons trimming her rose bushes while monitoring every driveway on the street. One evening, She saw Calvin leaving Evelyn's house at 10:41 p.m. To Calvin and Evelyn, it was just another night of talking. Evelyn sharing stories about her childhood in a small upstate farming town, and Calvin laughing over the time he accidentally painted a truck bright orange instead of sunset copper. To Mrs. Patterson, it was scandal. The next morning, she brought it up to Mrs. Wu while pretending to adjust her gardening gloves. "I don't want to imply anything," she began, which meant she absolutely did, but Calvin Rhodes was at Evelyn's awfully late last night. Mrs. Wu, polite, firm, and uninterested in drama, simply replied, "They're friends." But that wasn't good enough for Mrs.
Patterson.
By the end of the week, the story had evolved.
Calvin spends the night.
He goes over there every day. She lets him stay until after midnight. He's probably after her will.
Rumors spread through the neighborhood like pollen, silent, floating everywhere. The children hear the gossip.
On a Friday morning, Evelyn received a text from Brianna.
"Mom, call me ASAP. Something's going on over there."
Evelyn frowned and dialed. Brianna answered on the first ring. "Are you seeing someone?" "The neighbor told a co-worker who told me, Mom, this man is practically living with you." Evelyn, stunned, blinked at the microwave clock. "He lives across the street," she replied. "He helps me sometimes. That's all." "That's all?" Brianna repeated, incredulous. "You almost died, and now you're letting some old stranger into your house every night?" "He paid my hospital bill," Evelyn said before she could stop herself.
Silence.
Then a sharp inhale.
"He what?"
"Mom, that is exactly what scammers do. They play the hero, they swoop in, they pretend to care, then they take everything." Evelyn's fingers tightened on the phone. "He didn't pretend. He showed up when no one else did." Brianna spoke like someone performing a monologue, precise, controlled, righteous. "Mom, he wants something. People don't do things for free. We need to protect your assets."
"My assets?" Evelyn whispered. "You mean my house?"
"Well, yes," Brianna replied, blunt as a hammer.
"It's the only valuable thing you own."
The pain in Evelyn's chest was worse than pneumonia. Troy calls next. Troy called 2 hours later. "Mom, I heard some guy is sniffing around the property. I don't want to be rude, but if he touches your finances, if he even breathes near your mortgage paperwork, I'll step in legally." "Troy," Evelyn said wearily, "Calvin hasn't asked me for a single penny."
"That's how they get you. They act sweet, play the nice guy card, and once you let your guard down, boomfy, get rights to the house."
"Troy," she said, voice trembling, "I was sick. Alone. He helped me."
"Yeah?
With what motive? Nobody does charity without something in return." She swallowed hard. The irony burned. Her own son believed kindness had no place in the real world.
Lila's disappointment.
Lila finally called in the evening. Her tone wasn't angry like Brianna's or loud like Troy's. She sounded embarrassed. "Mom, people are talking. It looks bad." "It looks lonely without Calvin here," Evelyn replied honestly. "But no one calls about that." Lila hesitated. "I just don't want you hurt."
Evelyn closed her eyes.
"I'm already hurt, sweetheart."
"Just not in the way you think." The breaking point.
2 days later, all 3 children called again, this time together on a group video chat. Their faces appeared in 3 rectangles on Evelyn's old tablet. Brianna in her chic Chicago condo, Troy in a dim apartment with sports posters, Lila in a shared office space.
Brianna spoke first.
"Mom, we need you to stop seeing this man."
Evelyn blinked.
"He is my friend."
Troy leaned forward.
He's manipulating you. Lila added softly, we're just worried. Evelyn felt something inside her shift, something quiet, steady, and previously hidden under years of polite patience. She straightened her shoulders. You three never visit unless it's convenient, she said, not cruelly, but truthfully.
You never ask who my days are. You never ask if the nights feel long. The children exchanged guilty glances.
But this man, she continued, voice trembling but firm, brings me bread every morning.
He sits with me when I can sleep.
He listens. He cares. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel invisible. Troy opened his mouth to argue. She raised her hand.
No.
I'm speaking now. You all think he wants my money. But tell me. She paused, letting the silence weigh heavy. When was the last time any of you wanted anything from me besides this house? None of them answered.
Evelyn exhaled slowly, the burden lifting a fraction. When you ready to talk to me with kindness, call again.
Then she ended the video call, her hands shaking, her heart pounding, but her spirit steadier than ever.
The quiet after the storm.
That evening, Calvin knocked lightly. You okay? He asked. Evelyn smiled sadly. My children think you're after my property. Calvin snorted, actually snorted, then turned red. Pardon me. That just slipped out. She laughed for the first time that day, a soft laugh like the sound of a cracked window letting in fresh air.
Calvin grew serious. Evelyn, I don't want anything from you. Not your house. Not your money.
Not even your time if it hurts you. I'm just grateful to have someone to talk to again. She touched his hand gently. I know.
Outside, spring breeze rustled the maple trees.
Inside, the two elderly neighbors sat with cups of chamomile tea, their shoulders brushing just barely, the room warm with a quiet understanding that didn't need to be labeled or defended. No gossip could change that.
No rumor could touch it.
And in that fragile, precious calm, Evelyn realized something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't afraid of growing old anymore. Not as long as she wasn't growing old alone. May arrived in Rochester with the kind of moody weather only upstate New York could produce: sunny mornings, sudden downpours, cold evenings, and a sky that never seemed to settle on one color. On May 12th, the day felt particularly unsettled, muggy air pressing down, low-hanging clouds hinting at rain, and a wind that swept through Lake Avenue like it was carrying warnings no one could hear. Evelyn Markham woke that morning feeling lighter than she had in months. Her lungs no longer crackled painfully, and she had slept soundly thanks, she insisted, to the lavender tea Calvin brought her the night before. She stretched, opened her window just a crack, and breathed in the smell of wet earth and lilac blooms drifting from a nearby yard. At 3:20 p.m., she remembered she hadn't checked her mail in 2 days. It was a small ritual she usually enjoyed, walking to the communal mailbox near the corner, greeting neighbors, watching kids ride their bikes. Since her illness, she'd been cautious, but today she felt steady enough. She slipped on her green knitted cardigan, the one Walter always loved, and stepped outside. The sky had darkened with clouds the color of bruised steel. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, but the street still looked harmless enough. Across the road, Calvin Rhodes was kneeling by his driveway, coaxing a stubborn weed away from his rose bushes. He looked up as she passed. You sure you want to walk out in this weather? He called. Evelyn smiled faintly. It's barely sprinkling. Calvin frowned. Barely is usually how it starts. You worry too much, she teased. Somebody has to, he muttered under his breath, but she didn't hear him clearly. Evelyn walked toward the mailboxes, leaning slightly on her cane but moving confidently. 2 boys zoomed past on scooters, laughing, their jackets flapping behind them.
A dog barked somewhere. A garbage truck rumbled in the distance. Everything felt ordinary.
And yet, the wet leaves on the pavement glistened from a drizzle that had passed moments before. A UPS delivery truck rolled down the street faster than usual, trying to get ahead of the incoming storm. The driver, glancing between the road and the touchscreen scanner beside him, hadn't noticed the slick curve ahead. Evelyn reached the mailbox, opened the metal door, and found 3 envelopes inside. Bills, most likely. She tucked them against her chest and turned around. That was when the sky opened. A sudden downpour crashed down with alarming force, drenching the neighborhood within seconds. Evelyn gasped, shielding her face with her arm. Across the street, Calvin stood abruptly.
Evelyn.
Wait, just stay there, I'll get you an umbrella. He jogged toward his house. The UPS driver tapped his brakes as he saw a woman near the road. But the tires hit a patch of soaked leaves. The truck jerked, skidded sideways.
The wheels screamed against the pavement.
And control evaporated. Evelyn heard the noise, turned her head. Impact. A sound that was part crash, part thud, part something too heavy to describe. Neighbors shouted. A car alarm blared. Mail scattered like feathers across the street. Calvin spun around at the noise, instantly realizing it came from exactly where she had been standing moments earlier.
Evelyn.
He ran with a speed no man his age should have possessed. His shoes slipped on the rain-soaked road, but he didn't stop. He didn't breathe. He didn't think. He found her lying halfway between the curb and the mailbox. Her green cardigan was soaked through. Her hair clung to her forehead. Her eyes were half open, dazed, unfocused. Evelyn, he choked, kneeling beside her.
Stay with me, sweetheart. I am right here.
Her lips trembled as she tried to speak.
Calvin.
I'm here, he whispered, pressing trembling fingers against her cheek. Blood seeped slowly from a wound near her temple, mixing with rainwater, forming thin red trails streaming toward the gutter. The sight tore at him, but he held her gently, lowering her head onto his lap.
Neighbors gathered under umbrellas, frightened and helpless.
Mrs. Wu called 911 with shaking hands. The UPS driver cried, I didn't see her, I'm so sorry. Calvin didn't hear any of it. All he saw was Evelyn. Her hand reached up, brushing weakly against his chest. I'm sorry, she whispered.
For what?
Calvin said, voice cracking. For making you worry.
Tears blurred his vision. No, don't talk like that.
Stay awake.
Stay awake for me.
The paramedics arrived within minutes, but every second felt like a lifetime. They lifted her carefully onto a stretcher, securing her with straps, placing an oxygen mask over her mouth. Calvin tried to follow, but a paramedic gently pushed him back. Sir, please. We need space. I'm coming with her, he protested. You can follow in your own vehicle. Those words shattered him more than they should have. He drove behind the ambulance through sheets of rain, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out everything else. At Rochester General Hospital, doctors rushed her into emergency trauma care. Calvin waited in the hallway, soaked, shaking, really praying for the first time in years. A doctor finally approached him. Are you family? She asked.
Calvin hesitated.
I'm her neighbor. Her face softened. I'm very sorry.
The words came slowly, heavy, final.
She didn't make it. The trauma was too severe. Calvin stared at her. The hallway lights hissed softly. A pair of stretchers rolled past.
A nurse laughed quietly somewhere down the hall.
But everything felt distant, unreal, like sound underwater. He whispered, barely audible. "No, no, please, she was fine this morning." "I'm sorry," the doctor repeated.
Calvin's legs gave out.
He sat heavily on the nearest plastic chair, head bowed, water dripping from his soaked cardigan onto the sterile floor. The funeral. A week later, the small St. Andrew's Methodist Church on the east side of Rochester filled with the scent of lilies and damp coats. The sky outside was gray again, unsettled, as if refusing to move on. Evelyn's 3 children arrived late, stepping quietly into the pew reserved for family. Brianna wore a sleek black pantsuit, makeup flawless. Troy dressed in an expensive suit that didn't fit his slouched posture. Lila clutched a tissue and looked smaller than usual. They cried loudly, wailing, dramatic sobs.
But their eyes? Dry.
Perfectly dry. A few neighbors exchanged glances. Even the pastor looked uncertain. Calvin sat alone in the last pew, wearing his best yet still fraying gray blazer. He held the cream-colored handkerchief Evelyn had embroidered for him during her recovery, the tiny stitched initials EM pressed tightly in his palm. As the pastor spoke about Evelyn's kindness, her generosity, her quiet strength, Calvin felt every word like a bruise. Because he knew those things intimately. And he knew the children didn't. When the service ended, people lined up to offer condolences.
Brianna shook hands, accepting sympathy like a business transaction.
Troy kept checking his phone. Lila hugged everyone who approached but avoided meeting Calvin's eyes. Calvin waited until the crowd thinned. Then he approached the Casquita polished mahogany piece with a spray of white roses. He placed the handkerchief gently inside, smoothing it with a trembling hand. His voice broke as he whispered,
"You made my life less lonely. I hope you knew that."
Rain began tapping against the stained glass windows.
The pastor closed the casket. And just like that,
the last warm chapter of Calvin's life ended. But he didn't know yet that the worst was still coming. Not from grief, but from the living. The days following Evelyn Markham's funeral moved with the sluggish heaviness of late spring storms. The sky over Rochester remained a washed-out gray, unwilling to brighten, as if the weather itself insisted on mourning. Calvin Rhodes found himself drifting around his house like a ghost, touching objects that no longer meant much, staring out windows without truly seeing the world outside. The hum of the refrigerator became company. The creak of his worn floorboards felt like conversation. He didn't go far from home. Didn't answer many phone calls. Didn't speak to neighbors unless absolutely necessary. Grief had reshaped the hours of his day, stretching some painfully long, while others slipped away unnoticed. And through all of it, he had no idea that a storm far more vicious than the one that took Evelyn's life was heading straight toward him.
The letter from the attorney.
On a drizzly Thursday morning, 3 days after the burial, Calvin found a cream-colored envelope taped to his door.
From the law office of Samuel R.
Boone, Esq.
R.A. Estate of Evelyn Louise Markham.
Urgent, please contact immediately.
Calvin read the name twice.
Then a third time. Evelyn had never mentioned an attorney. She'd barely ever mentioned her bills, much less anything legal. He swallowed hard. Maybe there were medical documents needing signatures. Maybe she'd left instructions about her houseplants or her belongings. He didn't want to be dragged into her family's affairs, but he owed her this much to at least follow whatever last wishes she had. He dialed the number on the note. A polite secretary asked if he could come to the office that afternoon.
Are her children going to be there?
Calvin asked, already uneasy. Yes, the woman said. The Markham family will be present.
Mrs.
Markham's will is being opened. Calvin froze. Will? He hadn't even known she had one. 2 wasn't expecting.
Mr. Rhodes, Mrs.
Markham listed you as a required participant. She specified your presence. He stared at the phone long after the call ended, his stomach tightening in knots. Whatever Evelyn had written, whatever she had planned, wasn't sure he was ready for it.
The gathering at the law office.
The law firm sat on the second floor of a refurbished brick building downtown.
A plaque on the door read, Samuel R. Bohne Estate und Legacy Planning.
Inside, the waiting room smelled of lemon polish and old carpet. 3 chairs were occupied by Brianna, Troy, and Lila. They noticed him immediately. Brianna stiffened. Troy narrowed his eyes. Lila looked away. Calvin greeted them quietly, but only Lila nodded back, and even that seemed difficult for her. Moments later, the secretary led them into a conference room with a long mahogany table. At the head sat attorney Samuel Boone, a man in his mid-50s with neat wire-rim glasses and a meticulous stack of folders in front of him. "Thank you for coming," Boone said. "We're here to review the last will and testament of the late Evelyn Louise Markham." Calvin sat near the far end of the table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles paled. Boone cleared his throat and opened a sealed envelope marked with Evelyn's signature across the flap. "Before I begin, I need to note that Mrs. Markham updated her will on January 27th of this year." All 3 children exchanged startled glances. "That's right after her hospitalization," Brianna said sharply. "She was medicated and weak." "Is that even legal?" Boone adjusted his glasses. "She was evaluated as mentally sound by her physician at that time. The document is fully valid." Troy scoffed. "We'll see about that." Boone ignored him and pulled out the will. "I will start with the preliminary declarations and then proceed to the distribution of assets." The secret Evelyn took to her grave. The attorney began reading. Evelyn Louise Markham, being of sound mind and free will, declare this document to be my final wishes. Calvin felt his chest tighten. Hearing her actual words made the room feel too small. Boone continued. "To my children Brianna, Troy, and Lila, I leave my love and the hope that they may one day understand the choices I have made." Brianna frowned. Troy folded his arms. Lila bit her lip. Then Boone turned the page. "There is a substantial matter you may not be aware of," he said calmly. 3 years ago, Mrs. Markham purchased a New York State lottery ticket at a convenience store on Ridge Road. She won a jackpot totaling $2.1 million. Silence. Complete, stunned silence. Then, "What?" Brianna blurted out. "You re-lying," Troy snapped. "That can't be right," Lila whispered, visibly shaken. Boone folded his hands. "If you'd like to see the documentation." "Of course we want to see it." Brianna cried. Boone opened a file. Inside was the NYSL prize confirmation, deposit statements, and yearly account summaries. All accurate. All verified. All untouched. "She never said a word," Lila murmured, eyes brimming. Troy looked like he might faint. Brianna looked like she might explode. Calvin, meanwhile, sat frozen. He had spent nights listening to Evelyn talk about choosing cheaper groceries, worrying about heating bills, clipping coupons like a religion. She'd lived painfully modestly for years. Why hadn't she used the money? Why had she kept it a secret? Boone answered as if reading Calvin's thoughts. Mrs. Markham expressed concerns that her children were financially comfortable and might react negatively or rely too heavily on her winnings. She was adamant about maintaining independence. Troy laughed bitterly. Independence? She could have lived better. She didn't want luxury, Boone said. She wanted peace.
The will's final lines.
Boone flipped to the last page. And now for the distribution. The room grew still, every breath held. Boone read. I leave my home at 1427, Lake Avenue, along with all personal belongings within, to Mr. Calvin Joseph Rhodes, my neighbor, my friend, and the person who reminded me that companionship still exists.
Brianna gasped.
Troy slammed a fist onto the table. Lila covered her mouth with both hands. Boone continued. I also leave to Mr. Calvin Rhodes the entirety of my savings, including the protected lottery account held under my name. Troy shot up from his chair.
No.
No.
This is manipulation.
This man preyed on her loneliness. Calvin flinched as if struck. Boone's tone remained steady.
Mr.
Markham, please sit. Troy didn't.
Boone, read the final paragraph.
To my children, you have your own lives, your own incomes, your own independence. I do not leave these assets to hurt you, but because Mr. Rhodes gave me the kindness, patience, and presence you no longer offered. I hope one day you will forgive me for choosing with my heart rather than obligation. Calvin could no longer breathe properly. His throat tightened, eyes burning. He had never asked for anything from her. Never hinted. Never imagined she'd leave him her home, much less a fortune. Boone sealed the reading with the final line. This document is signed, dated, and witnessed. These are her final instructions. When he looked up, the room felt like a powder keg. The children's reactions. Brianna stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. She was old. Sick. Lonely. Of course, she latched onto the first person who paid attention. Troy paced furiously, face red. This guy swoops in, pretends to be her friend, pays a bill or two, then BAM suddenly gets millions? It's a scam.
This is a con.
Lila didn't shout, but her face was pale. She loved us, she whispered. She did. Maybe we failed her. Brianna rounded on her.
Don't you dare take his side.
I'm not, Lila said, voice trembling. But Mom wasn't stupid. If she chose this, maybe she had a reason.
Brianna scoffed.
Her reason is sitting right over there in a thrift store jacket. Calvin's face heated with humiliation. He opened his mouth to speak, maybe to defend himself, maybe to apologize for something he hadn't done, but the words wouldn't form. You're going to court, Troy snarled. We're contesting this will. I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs. Boone interjected, calm but firm. You may contest, of course. But emotionally driven accusations won't overturn a legally solid will. You'll see, Troy hissed. We're not letting some lonely old man walk off with our inheritance. Calvin finally stood, voice shaking.
I never wanted anything from your mother.
I only wanted her to feel. Don't. Brianna snapped. Don't pretend you cared more than we did.
Calvin's breath caught.
Not from anger.
From heartbreak.
He lowered his gaze.
Believe what you want.
I know what was true. And with that, he quietly left the room. Aftermath. In the hallway, away from their shouting, Calvin leaned against the wall, trying to steady himself. The attorney joined him moments later.
Mr.
Rhodes, Boone said gently, she made her choice with complete clarity.
She trusted you.
Calvin swallowed hard. I never asked her for anything. I know, Boone replied. And more importantly, she knew. Calvin closed his eyes. The weight of her trust. The enormous, unexpected, overwhelming weight. Pressed against his chest like something sacred and fragile. He didn't know yet that her children wouldn't stop. He didn't know about the threats that would follow. The anger.
The accusations. The plan forming quietly in the shadows.
He only knew one truth. Evelyn had loved him in her own quiet, stubborn, generous way. And that was worth more than anything in her will. The weeks that followed the reading of Evelyn Markham's will felt like a slow descent into a different kind of storm, one not made of thunder and rain, but whispers, threats, and shadows that stretched longer each day. Calvin Rhodes tried to keep to his routine. He trimmed his rose bushes, swept his porch, and continued volunteering twice a week at the animal shelter. But nothing felt the same. People in the neighborhood didn't look at him the same. Some stared with pity, others with suspicion, some with the sharp curiosity of people who crave drama.
And the Markham children?
They hadn't spoken a word to him since the explosive meeting at the law office.
Not until the night the phone rang.
The phone call. It was almost 9:30 p.m., and Calvin had just finished washing dishes when his landline rarely used began to ring. The sound jolted him. Only telemarketers used that number anymore. He dried his hands on a towel and answered cautiously.
"Hello."
A low male voice responded. One he didn't recognize.
"Mr. Rhodes."
"Yes, who's asking?" "I'm calling on behalf of Evelyn Markham." The tone was too calm, rehearsed. "There are documents that belong to her."
"Important ones."
Calvin stiffened.
"What kind of documents?"
"Things she intended only for you. Things she didn't trust anyone else with."
A pause.
"We should meet." Calvin felt unease crawl up his spine. "Where?" "The old quarry off Lake Road. You know, the one, the abandoned mining site near Irondequoit. 10 p.m.
Sharp. Come alone."
A faint static crackled. Then the line went dead. Calvin stared at the receiver. Something about the voice lacked sincerity. Something about the location was wrong. No one met at a deserted quarry late at night unless trouble was guaranteed. He considered ignoring it. But what if it was something Evelyn left behind? Something she wanted him to know? And yet, his instincts, sharpened by age and loss, screamed that this wasn't a gift.
It was bait.
He went to his coat rack, grabbed Evelyn's old umbrella, the one he kept since her funeral, and stepped into the night.
But he did not go to the quarry.
He drove straight to the Rochester Police Department.
The police take it seriously.
Officer Leonard Grady, a broad-shouldered man with a calm presence, listened carefully as Calvin described the phone call. Grady didn't brush it off. He didn't give a patronizing smile.
He didn't say, "It's probably nothing."
Instead, he leaned forward.
"Mr.
Rhodes, you're involved in a contested will worth over $2 million.
People kill for less than that."
Calvin swallowed.
"So you think?" "I think someone wants you isolated.
Vulnerable.
If you show up alone at that quarry."
He didn't finish the sentence. Another officer, Detective Mara Bishop, stepped in. She had sharp eyes and a steady voice.
"We'll set up a sting." Calvin blinked. "A sting."
"You'll drive there," Bishop explained, "but you'll stay in your truck.
Keep your lights on. Keep your doors locked.
Our team will be stationed around the perimeter. Whoever shows up isn't expecting company."
Calvin hesitated.
"And if they're dangerous?" Bishop offered a grim smile. "They won't expect us." An hour later, Calvin found himself driving down Lake Road, dark woods on either side, his headlights cutting through fog that drifted low over the pavement. His hands trembled. He gripped the wheel harder. Evelyn's voice drifted back to him. "Don't worry so much, Calvin, someone has to, but not always you." He whispered, "I'm trying, Evelyn.
I'm trying." The quarry.
The abandoned quarry was a shallow crater surrounded by steep rock walls and wild brush.
A single rusted chain link fence barely protected the entrance.
Streetlights didn't reach that far. The only illumination came from Calvin's headlights and the faint glow of the moon behind thick clouds. He parked as instructed. Kept the engine running. Doors locked. Breath shaky. Silence swallowed the place whole. Then,
footsteps. Crunching gravel.
2 silhouettes emerged from the tree line.
Calvin's breath caught.
The figures approached with hurried purpose, one carrying what looked unmistakably like a shovel, the other dragging a long duffel bag. Neither noticed the faint glint of police scopes on the ridge above. Calvin pressed a trembling hand against his chest. This was real.
This wasn't paranoia.
This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone truly wanted him dead. One man pointed toward Calvin's truck.
There he is. Told you he'd show.
The other grunted, already scanning the ground for a place to dig.
That was when the night exploded. Police. Don't move.
Flashlights burst to life. Officers surged from behind boulders, from the ridge above, from behind trees circling the 2 men in seconds. The attackers froze, stunned. One dropped the shovel. The other made the mistake of running.
He didn't get 10 feet before he was tackled. Calvin watched through the windshield, shaking uncontrollably.
The officers cuffed both men and dragged them toward the patrol cars. Detective Bishop approached Calvin's driver's side window. "It's over," she said softly.
"You're safe." But her expression tightened. "There's something else."
The evidence that broke the Markham family. Back at the station, the arrested men spoke quickly, too quickly. One asked for a lawyer. The other asked for a cigarette. Then the truth spilled out. They'd been paid. And not just paid.
Instructed.
Detective Bishop placed a stack of printed screenshots in front of Calvin in the interview room.
"Recognize these?"
Calvin skimmed the first page.
A WhatsApp thread. A money transfer receipt.
A voice memo transcript. At the bottom of one page, he saw the name.
Troy Markham.
He felt sick. Bishop nodded grimly. "Your suspicion was right. This wasn't random." She flipped to the next page.
Brianna's name. A bank transfer. A message reading, "Make it fast. He can keep the house."
Then, to Calvin's shock, Lila's name appeared too. Her message was shorter, less direct, but damning. "Get it done. Mom wouldn't have wanted him to have everything." Calvin leaned back, breath knocked out of him. He felt betrayed by people who had barely ever acknowledged him but whom he had desperately wanted to avoid hating. How could they, his voice broke, do something like this? Bishop placed a hand on the table. "Greed is a powerful thing, Mr.
Rhodes. It makes good people dangerous. It makes selfish people lethal."
The trial moved faster than anyone expected. The evidence was overwhelming. Transfers, messages, digital logs, even a recorded audio clip where Troy's slurred voice said, "Just make him disappear."
Quiet.
The courtroom filled for 3 days with murmurs, gasps, accusations, tears. Brianna, normally composed, sobbed theatrically, insisting she'd been manipulated by grief. Troy, stone-faced, refused to speak. Lila, trembling, whispered apologies toward the floor but never once looked at Calvin. The verdict was unanimous.
Guilty.
Conspiracy to commit homicide. Sentences ranged from several years to over a decade.
When the final gavel struck, Calvin felt no triumph, only an aching sorrow, deeper than even Evelyn's death.
Because she had loved her children despite everything. She'd hoped they would find kindness again. They had chosen something else entirely.
The final letter.
After the sentencing, Attorney Boone invited Calvin to Evelyn's house now legally histo pick up a wooden keepsake box she had left him. It was small, carved with delicate flowers, and smelled faintly of lavender. Inside was a folded letter. Calvin sat on Evelyn's old sofa, opened the envelope, and began reading.
My dear Calvin,
if you are holding this, I am gone. I don't want you to grieve longer than necessary. You gave me peace in my last year, something I had not felt in a very long time. You were the friend I prayed for without realizing it.
Please don't let my children's choices dim your spirit.
They are lost, not cruel, not entirely. Maybe life will soften them one day. Calvin paused, throat tightening. He wiped a tear before continuing.
The rose bush outside the white one, Walter planted it on our 30th anniversary.
It only ever bloomed once a year, but I loved it anyway. It reminded me that even fragile things fight to come back. Please water it for me.
Love. Evelyn.
The last line made him close his eyes. P.S. If it blooms again, I hope you'll think of me.
The rain and the rose bush.
That evening, thick clouds rolled over Lake Avenue. A slow, steady rain began to fall, the kind that soaked the world gently, as if trying to wash away the remnants of a long, painful season. Calvin stepped outside with Evelyn's umbrella. The garden smelled of wet earth. The white rose bush stood near the fence, petals damp, leaves trembling under raindrops. He knelt in front of it, touching the soil, remembering her smile, her laughter, her quiet resilience.
He whispered, I am still here, Evelyn.
And I will be.
You are not alone anymore.
His voice wavered. Not from cold. From a strange, bittersweet peace settling in his heart. As he watered the bush, the rain mingled with the tears he didn't hide anymore. Above him, thunder rolled softly, not frightening, but comforting, like the sky clearing its throat after a long silence. Somewhere, in the deepest part of himself, Calvin felt it. Evelyn hadn't left him. Not really. And in the faint glimmer of moonlight breaking through the clouds, one small white rosebud unnoticed until now began to open.